Julie, I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. Do you know that Pete Lerma was here the other day, and in the conversation, he mentioned something about our director of cultural fluency. I was like, what? I mean, I have title jealousy. This is the sexiest title I have ever heard.
That's awesome.
And I want to know how you got to that title, because you don't go to the school to study like cultural fluency. So tell me everything about how you started in Lerma and how you end up with that super sexy title.
Okay, thanks. Well, by the way, that was a great interview. Pete's words about the work we do, why we do it, and the entire journey was it's so inspiring. It's what brought me to Lerma in the first place. And I was incredibly moved by his description of how my role and fits in with the larger vision that he has for Lerma and doing creativity for good.
How long have you been there?
3.5 years.
Okay.
And it's flown by, absolutely flown by. But the role just kind of came about in a very organic way. As Pete described too, cross-culturalism is the heart of what we do. And what we saw is, especially, with backlash, and you remember the case with Bud Light, and they had a trans woman influencer, and there was a lot of backlash. And also just recently with the attacks on DE&I, a lot of brands trying to figure out, what do our values compel us to do, and what does increasingly representation look like? And then there's the idea of cross-culturalism and what does that mean? And so all of these things swirling about, it just became evident that to really focus and strategically implement all of the safeguards, not only for brands, but also in our commitment to depicting transformational representation of historically marginalized groups, that there would be an opportunity for a role that could dedicate efforts exclusively towards that pursuit.
And that sounds fascinating. And I'm assuming that everybody's following my conversation and my podcast. But just in case, Lerma is one of the fastest growing agencies, independently owned advertising agencies. Pete Lerma founded and is the CEO, and he was here in the podcast. You can go and see his episode, and it is when I learned that he has a director of cultural fluency, who is Julie. And so you started with Lerma, and then everything started, like all that convoluted space, start things popping up. And you were there. What was your role at the beginning?
Well, in the beginning, I started on the creative side, but my background kind of prepared me for this kind of work. I studied human rights and psychology, and so I've always been fascinated about human behavior, about culture, about language, about respect and dignity, and then also in terms of advertising and marketing. I worked in politics too, so that was interesting. And politics, of course, is just about power and persuasion. And so in a strange way, my entire life has kind of led up to having a focus in this area. And then coming to work for a proudly Hispanic-owned marketing agency, seeing the work we do and the basic idea of honoring and dignifying historically marginalized groups, whether you're talking about multicultural or inclusive or cross-cultural marketing, but really any depiction that you have. If it's a campaign about women, if it's a campaign about older people and social services, all of these things have to be considered in terms of the representation of the people that you're trying to positively connect with or speak to.
Now, when I was talking to Pete, this is what I understood. Let me know if I'm right. So the way I understood your role is in any average agency, common agency out there, when you have to plan for the Hispanic market, you study the Hispanics, and then that's about it. You go and strategize for the African American market, use African American. But the way you guys do it is you see the whole context, cultural context of all the groups, because that's a society, right? So it doesn't matter who are you preparing a strategy for, you have to consider all the components because everything impacts.
Absolutely, and under the microscope that brands are living right now as marketers, things that we want to consider, the political landscape, all of that, we need to face greater scrutiny when it comes to authenticity, as you say, about having insights and campaigns that resonate with the audiences we want to reach. But also, like in terms of just what I realized is we plug in, and where my role fits in is at every stage of the process. So we begin with an RFP or a kickoff for a brand, and we think about what's happening in politics today, what's happening at the sociocultural level.
Even if it's a CPG brand.
Yeah, everything. And then, so it might be further down the line then when we define, now how will that, for example, if it's a campaign targeted towards Black communities, then we would get much micro level and say, well, how are all of those factors? Might be the economy right now, right? It might be civil unrest or social movements. How are those things playing out for this particular community? And then we'd want impact to be authentic. So we would be seeking those views and that information from people who belong to that community too. Mm-hmm. Going to find, in terms of representation around the room, the creatives, the strategists, seeing where we have gaps, and then discussing about practical ways we can fill that gap so we can make that a better informed campaign. And then I evaluate the work as we go along and say, we gut test it, we pressure test it. What nuances might we need to know about this community to speak to that? What are some human truths, but what do they look like within that community? Like, is it something around, let's just say, a particular culture or music that's unique there? What do we need to know to make this really connect?
And then your role, where it sits in the organization, that you have strategic planning, you have creative, account service, so you have like it's a separate pillar, or it sits together with planning, or how that works?
That's been fun to figure out. So really, like if you hear about a cultural strategist, some agencies might have some aspect of that, and that might be just kind of final eyes on a piece of a campaign or the creative output before it goes to market. But actually, I plug in with every single other discipline at almost every stage of a campaign. But it's been kind of straddled between strategy right now, but also I have the benefit of going directly to Pedro and talking to him on a weekly basis, talking about what's happening in culture and society and politics, and then kind of really cooperating with every discipline in the agency.
So that's super interesting. And when you say I'm going and talking to him, is like a conversation. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? More like a bounce back ideas and situations, or how is that conversation?
We set aside 15 minutes every week. His time is very valuable. He's a very busy man, as you know.
Yeah.
And I just kind of check in and say, hey, this is what I'm reading in terms of, like, it might be something from Foreign Policy magazine. It might be something from a nonprofit talking about how social services are impacting people who are living in poverty. It might be something that I read from the Hispanic Marketing Council and some new insights they put out. It might be something from a podcast from another influencer or marketer, and I'll say, this is just a brilliant thought. And so we just kind of feed each other and catch up with the latest news and things that are happening, politics, culture, economy, socially, and music, art, everything.
So you are the eyes and the ears of the agency in all culture things. I mean, I know that everybody find their own information, but it's kind of your responsibility to keep the agency updated.
I kind of think that and strategy has been known to, I don't want to overstep my influence or my role. I mean, strategy has their pulse on culture. We certainly collaborate with a lot of really talented folks that are very ingrained and embedded within their own cultures. All of us have some sort of perspective that no one else could match and that we uniquely know. And so they fuel that. I kind of work as both I would say both risk and opportunity when it comes to brand reputation, but also in terms of expanding and growing that market share to, as you know well, the opportunities within the
Got it.
diverse America with which we currently live, right? And so that's looking for opportunities to expand and broaden brands to reach more cross-cultural communities and segments, but it's also to say what might be sensitive within this particular community that we need to consider.
Yeah. You know, it made me think, I listened to you talking and it makes me think about Zuckerberg saying that, oh, right now we're going to have AI, you're not going to need agencies. And then all this thinking and all this work and analysis and intelligence, that human intelligence that goes behind understanding the culture, the cultural nuances, the impact of those nuances. Yes, somehow artificial intelligence could understand it, but to make those connections at a very human level that are all consumers, that's impossible.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it. I love to network and meet other people that are doing this work, people that work in DE&I, people that are cultural strategists, or people that just have their thumb on the pulse of what's happening. And I met a wonderful woman named Chandra, Gwen. She works for McKinney, and we met over an ANA conference, and she made an observation about AI that I am just going to borrow. She said, "Isn't it funny how we're trying to make AI more human, and in the real world, we're going around as humans dehumanizing one another." And that just was like so profound in my mind. And I thought, gosh, yeah, that is the challenge. So what can we talk about, like what's happening in reality and in our communities and across the globe right now? And then how can we take information that we receive online and see if it's culturally sensitive? Is it accurate? Is it authentic? And then, as you've talked about often, having critical thinking to say, what is this? What is the source? Is that a reliable source? And what can I take away to make sure that that is something that is profound or true? And what would that mean for me to go ahead and apply that?
So how is the difference between your role and the cultural strategies of other agencies? How you have made this so unique?
I think it's an ideal first to become cultural fluence, have cultural fluency, or to become culturally fluent. And so I approach it with the humility first, an assessment of what representation do we have around the room for a particular project. What are our resources? What gaps might we fill? And then also hopefully with a degree of humility, knowing what we lack and how we might compensate for that. What do we need to learn to do this work well? And I think cultural strategists might be looking at one particular insight. We not only begin with an insight, but we also examine the implementation, the activation, and say, was it successful? Was it meaningful? And did we push for something like transformational representation? Like when we talk about the work for Home Depot, is it changing people's perceptions of a particular group? Are we avoiding tropes, negative stereotypes? And are we actually pushing for creativity for good? And so that's kind of what I would say is it touches every aspect of advertising as opposed to just a singular insight in the strategic phase.
You talk about creativity for good, which is Lerma's, what would you say, mission, promise?
I'd say it's almost like our vision statement in a
Vision
sense
statement.
too. Yeah.
How is that interpreted from your perspective of culture?
Oh, what a great question. I kind of take this idea of I call it the Hippocratic Oath of marketing, which is to do no harm. I think as marketers, we want to win awards. We want to do great work. We want to do work that we're proud of. And for me, I come for this risk opportunity assessment, which first I want to make sure that the portrayals are authentic, of course, but are they positive? Is it changing anyone's mind about, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a woman in the workplace? What does it mean to be a mother? What does it mean to be a member of this particular community? What does it mean to be someone who's living in poverty? For example, we work with faith-based clients and do a lot of work for nonprofits. So all of these things, whether it's disability, socioeconomic status, citizenship status, all of these things, we want to portray the best possible representation and depiction for not only our brands, but in service to communities. And that, I think, is what we aim to achieve. And that is more than just doing good marketing. It's doing marketing that makes a difference.
Yeah. I have heard Pete saying, you call him Pedro, call him Pete, he's Pedro Lerma, but I
Mm-hmm.
met him as Pedro. He goes by both, but
Sure.
but it's the same person. Just to
Yep.
clarify. So I have heard him say that we can leave the world better than we found it. So I think that vision, that soul is what he brings into the agency. So that's, vision of creativity for good is with that hope to, through your work, leave communities, groups, society, the world better than we found it.
I mean, I like to think so. And certainly with the help of my colleagues too, we do things like develop conscious language guides for clients that talk about how, because culture changes, right? Language changes and it evolves. And sometimes it's co-opted, sometimes it's redefined. And so I'll create a guide based on the services, the audience we connect with for our teams to talk about how can we use conscious language when speaking about our audiences, when speaking about the work we do, for example, with Salvation Army or with the Home Depot and other brands with He Gets Us. How do we talk about people who have faith? How do we talk about people on their spiritual journey? And we're always looking for ways to consider how language has evolved and what's the best way to communicate that. And so that to me, when you're showing dignity in words and in representation, that is, I think, changing in the viewer's mind their ideas about foundationally about what groups are and what marketing can do.
I love you say that because I love words. I think that words have such a powerful impact. The words you choose, even when some of them means sort of the same thing, but how you combine them, how you read them.
Yeah.
So that's what you guys do is just in our advertising, based on this cultural context, we're going to use these kind of words.
Yeah, it matters in terms of like whether I'm saying, especially when we talk about people who need social services, right, or might be beneficiaries of the Salvation Army. I'll talk about how we don't use certain words and how things have changed. For example, people who have been in the criminal justice system. I'll talk about formerly incarcerated persons as opposed to using terminology that's considered offensive, like convicts. Or we'll talk about people who are experiencing homelessness because it's an experience, not a permanent state, right? Instead of saying homeless, the homeless. And so sometimes there are nuanced things like that, but we'll educate about that. Are we talking about people without legal status? Are we talking about historically marginalized people? And sometimes groups will largely go to resources that are by community and for community to find out what's the best way to talk about people, to honor their dignity, honor their humanity. And that's ultimately what brands come to us for, right, is our expertise, our consulting. And so we want to be heading the cause here with thought leadership and educating not only ourselves, but our clients.
So when you say that, I imagine has to be brands that have the same vision that you guys have, because otherwise, why do I have to change the way I talk or my brand talks? So do you like it is accurate to say that the brands that work with Lerma are brands with the same principles and values and ambition?
Well, I think any marketer is going to tailor their work for the client based on their client and based on their core audience and the goals and values and vision of that client, right? So what might be a representation that's transformative, that's positive, that's groundbreaking for He Gets Us might be different for a different client, for consumer packaged goods, for example, right? But I think that the aim is the same. I think that if you look at cases of backlash, whether it was with Heinz, with some offensive campaigns that they had done lately, or campaigns about celibacy on Bumble. I don't know if you remember that one. They were having some microaggressions toward women, their ability to have autonomy in their decision whether or not to date online.
But what's that? So for everybody to understand,
Oh,
can you
yeah.
tell us the case?
So I'll unpack that. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
Okay,
unpack
good.
it.
It's so juicy. So Bumble put out a series of ads that said something to the effect of women could give up their vows of celibacy and use the dating app to get back into the dating game, which was completely insensitive to women's desire to either pursue a partnership or intimacy or relationships.
Emotional intimacy, not necessarily physical intimacy.
On every count. Like, we have the right to decide. Right? And to say that the polar opposite is somehow, and it did allude to becoming a nun, it was wrong on so many levels, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And so those are the kinds of things, of course, we want to talk about. Are we promoting dignity, agency of individuals? The ability to words really matter to your earlier point, and so putting that fine lens upon all the work and upon the concept from the strategic stage all the way to the final execution. Is something that we value. And I think we've just been able to professionalize it in a way, and then also create education and then opportunities to have everyone contribute what they can. Because again, it doesn't start and end with my role. It's an agency-wide effort. And for me, it's just knowing who to tap, who has that lived experience, who has that point of view, what resources are available to us, and then our collective aim, putting that into a process-oriented fashion is really what we're after.
And there's processes within the agency?
To do this,
So how much of your time do you spend in learning, absorbing from the world what is going on? You have to spend a lot of time thinking. It's not only reading, it's reflecting and thinking and using your critical thinking, and that's fascinating. So how you find time to do all that, and when do you do it?
Well, I would love to ask you the same question, because I know you do the same thing when you're researching your books, when you're having an interview. You do all the same things, and I think it's the same thing that drives you probably is this yearning of curiosity, wanting to know how the world works and why, asking questions like, why is it like that? What is the status quo? Is why is that? How did we come to be? Like, what is the purpose of this, and what might we do differently? So I listen to a lot of podcasts. That's why I love this format, and I read a lot, and I follow a lot of different journals, educational journals, but also industry journals, and I'm just constantly wanting to learn more.
So that has a lot to do with curiosity, and curiosity leads to innovation. So do you think that this approach of Lerma really leads to a more innovative outputs?
It's by design, because when people critique DE&I and they say, why do we need to worry about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility? It's because that's at the heart of innovation. The more that we're not homogenous in our groupthink and the way we approach work, the more we're pulling from people that have lived experience and looking around the room and saying, how might we come together with a different perspective? That's what makes the work so rich and so pressure tested and so challenging, new, and really innovative.
And there's a tension right now. And I particularly think, let me finish my thought. So there's a tension between those that wants to use creativity for good and those who find meaningless all these type of efforts. So what, man, I love my train of thoughts. How do you deal with that tension? For example, if you have a client that doesn't believe in that, if you have the media, all of a sudden, some media just rejecting the idea of minorities, using the wrong words to describe certain type of individuals. So as an agency, how you deal with that? It seems like it's so small compared to the forces driving that.
Well, I think we have shared values, and this goes back to when I used to do policy work and disability advocacy, and disability rights. It's not a partisan issue, so I would work with people on both sides of the aisle, and what I would do, and I've had Republicans champion my bills, and we passed bills together as well as Democrats in the state house and congressional level, and I've advised campaigns, and we just come back to our shared human values. It's like dignity of all people. That's something we can agree upon. Now, what does it look like? What does that mean? We can find common ground. And this is something that Pete really champions too, is finding this common ground, this shared values here. And I think we can do that. It doesn't have to be a polarizing thing. I think that the work we've done for the variety of clients that we've done has really demonstrated our commitment in that regard. And knowing your client, knowing their objection or their objectives, and seeing how we can take them to get what they want, and knowing that this is the way, and having a track record of doing so really helps.
Yeah, you say something super interesting because I think that is how we understand each other. It's about empathy. I did an exercise in the podcast before the election. So I researched what are the top values of the Republican Party and what are the top values of the Democratic Party. And then what are the top values, my top 10 values. And then I start matching them.
Yeah.
And I realized that I have some of one and some of those.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe my top are not the top of this party, but the top of this party. But I still have like mix. So when we understand that we are all the same, it's just we have different we may have the same set of values or similar set of values, not necessarily in the same order, but more importantly, that all order can change depending on our context or situation, the moment in our life. So this thought, because it's fluent, so that's what that it makes it like cultural fluency, right?
Well, it's also super hard. I think we have to acknowledge that too. Just like when the world we're living in right now, if you've got family members, friends across the political spectrum, it can be hard to come together. And some of the issues that we're talking about, when you're talking about poverty, when you're talking about civil rights, when you're talking about human rights, dignity, all of these things, the difficulties we face, these are complex things. And this is a shifting, changing moment that we're in too. And so really just trying to adopt perspectives other than my own. And it's something that my colleagues do too. I can look at a work and I have to acknowledge first that I have bias. We all do.
Yeah.
But how can I get beyond that? How can someone open my aperture and help me see the world, audiences, ideas from another perspective? And that's really what we're trying to do. So we're trying to become more open-minded and see what else we might consider. Who else has a position that we hadn't thought about? I mean, these lessons for the work that we do have profound ramifications, and if put into practice, could really help us deal with everyone in our lives too. But thank goodness it's just about the work we do in any given day. But it's hard, but it's so rewarding.
How do you challenge within the agency context your own bias and your team's bias? Because, I mean, advertising agencies are places with very, very passionate people. I mean, it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And you're passionate about your ideas and you're passionate about your type of creativity. So how intentionally within the agency you guys challenge your own bias?
Well, first we create a very safe space. And so we want to level set. This is not a discipline. Like you said, there's no degree for this. It's not even a set discipline within agencies. And so to come into the work where if you've been working 10 or 20 years and you're like, I've always done it this way, now I've got to consider this whole other thing of cultural fluency, or am I being culturally authentic? Might I be using language that's offensive? Is this a respectful representation? That's a lot. And suddenly you just made my job harder.
Yeah.
So what we do is we talk about how the work is hard. We start where we are. We acknowledge everyone's hearts and their best intention. No one that I've ever worked with intentionally wants to create something that is going to harm, and we always acknowledge that we're all growing and we're on a journey. And so just bringing other people along, letting them know it's safe to have these difficult conversations, acknowledging our intent, but also understanding that our intent does not supersede the action, the impact, right? And so we're all working together, building that trust, and then building it as a discipline, as an education. And other people have been responsible for my own edification. My Black women friends, my colleagues, my Hispanic colleagues at work too. They have taught me so much. I cannot take that perspective, but I can go to them and say, help me understand this. What am I missing from my limited experience? And we lean on each other and we trust each other to share that. And it can be vulnerable. It can be hard. But I think that the benefits of that, at least I've witnessed, and hopefully I would think that my colleagues, not only do they get my gratitude for it, but they see the work is better for it,
Yeah.
for bringing themselves to work, their entire identities, their spirituality, their faith, but their identities and their experience from community as well.
And that shapes Lerma's culture.
Oh, I mean, I couldn't do it with better people. If I didn't trust them, if Pedro had not put the trust and responsibility for me to pursue this role, I don't think I would have even wanted to tackle it. It's really the open-mindedness and the willingness for the people to trust that we all have the best intentions and we're trying to do good work, and that we will sometimes fail, but we will get there.
Everything is not everything, but a lot of the campaigns that we do in advertising are measured. Have you seen the impact of this mindset and everything that you guys do on that regards of cultural fluency in the results of the work?
Oh yeah, the business case is the easy part. And so even if it seems politicized, the business case is there. Same thing for DE&I and multicultural marketing, cross-cultural marketing. The audiences are there. We know that the creative that have more cultural authenticity score higher. There's metrics and work done by not only A&A, but Unstereotype Alliance that talks about when you have positive representations of women, of Hispanic communities, of Black communities, Asian American communities, people with disabilities, LGBTQ audiences, that not only do they feel more connected to the brand, but there's a spillover effect. So if I'm adjacent to that community or if I'm an ally of that community, I also see that. And I say, they get it. They clearly get it. That to me shows that I might not be a member of that community, but I might have other issues or other identities that are historically marginalized. So I say, okay, a representation that's authentic about LGBTQ audiences, they probably know what's up with disability communities too. They're concerned about us. They see us. They know us. I trust them, and so they test better. People tend to be more loyal to those brands, and it becomes, especially in this day and age, something that's really meaningful and feels ambitious, but also the right thing to do.
And in terms of, can you give me an example of how, the measurement that you get from that?
Well, Dove campaigns have been award-winning campaigns.
Oh,
You've
yeah,
seen other
that's still
brands.
winning. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when we have authentic representation too, and it's positive, right? Not only about women and in regards to diversity and body representation, body size, beauty. I mean, a lot of beauty brands have made this
What
case.
is spectacular about that campaign is that it really changed the conversation about female self-esteem and beauty. It was not a campaign, it was really changing the conversation for good.
Oh, yes.
And now I see the connection. That's what we call advertising for good.
Yeah, and it was authentic, and it was clearly informed by women who knew what they were talking about, by communities. It was done well. It was just, it was stellar. It's a great.
So
great
unfortunately, we're running out of time again. This is so interesting. This goes by so quickly. But I want to hear from you. This is new. It's a new role. The role is evolving. Is fluent. What do you think is that now with AI and everything that is happening? What do you think that is the next iteration of a cultural role in an agency, especially in Lerma?
Oh, that's so exciting. I think really that what we're going to do is we're going to increasingly and not only use it as an audit tool to say where does a brand stand now, but given the demographics and the younger generation, Gen Z being so profoundly, beautifully diverse, multicultural, but also multiracial being the segment that's growing the fastest, 24% of Gen Z being LGBTQ. I think
24%?
24%, the latest study.
How that compares to previous generations?
Well, we've gone from 7% of all adults in the U.S. to now 9%. It's driven by those younger generations identifying as increasingly LGBTQ. And so generational replacement happens, right? Younger generations identifying more, changing that overall number for the nation. And I think when we see, when we show brands those statistics and we say, if you want to grow, it's really through cross-cultural representation. You want to reach these audiences, we can tell you how. We can tell you how to do so authentically, consciously, respectfully, and really transform, while also, and this is the important part, as a marketer, speaking to core audiences and retaining those core audiences. And so it's a dance to
Without
be able to
alienating.
correct.
Just connecting with other audiences without alienating your core audiences.
Correct. And that goes back to your observation about common ground, right? And that's such a strategist way of thinking. What are the needs? What are the shared values? Where's the overlap between core audiences and growth audiences, which we feel is in the cross-cultural segment?
That's super exciting. I have a niece working at Washington, working for the Human Rights Campaign.
Oh, fantastic.
So she will, Bella, this is for you.
Yay.
She will absolutely love this conversation.
Oh, great. That's fantastic.
So, Julie, it was so great having you here, so insightful. I have my questions in my head are faster than what I can ask, but I would love to continue this conversation after and just learn about everything else that you guys are doing and the results and how you're changing the world one brand at a time.
Well, it's an honor. It's a pleasure. And I learned from you listening to your podcast, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for having me.
Thank